Marcus Chen's consciousness surfaced like a swimmer breaking through dark water. The first sensation was wrongness. Everything felt wrong. The air tasted metallic and carried unfamiliar scents that made his nose twitch. The light filtering through his closed eyelids held an odd blue-green quality that Earth's sun had never produced. Even the gravity seemed different, lighter somehow, as if he might float away if he moved too quickly. Pain followed awareness. His left leg throbbed with a deep, aching pulse that suggested serious injury. His ribs felt like someone had used them for target practice, and a persistent ringing in his ears made it difficult to focus. But he was alive, which was more than he'd expected when the Catharan patrol ship had opened fire on his survey vessel 3 days ago. 3 days ago. The memory crashed back with vivid clarity. The routine geological survey of the contested border system, the sudden appearance of the sleek, predatory ships that materialized from seemingly empty space. Captain Rodriguez shouting orders as the hull breach alarms shrieked their electronic death songs, the last desperate message to Earth Command before everything went black. Marcus tried to open his eyes, but the lids felt heavy as lead. A soft sound reached him through the ringing. Footsteps, but not quite human footsteps. The rhythm was wrong, too quick, with an odd triple beat pattern that suggested something with more than 2 legs. He forced himself to remain still, to breathe slowly and evenly while he gathered information. The footsteps stopped nearby, and he heard the whisper of fabric moving. The soft clink of what might have been medical instruments. A voice spoke, low and melodious. But the words were in no language he recognized. The tone carried professional concern, the same inflection he'd heard from doctors and nurses throughout his life, but the underlying harmonics were distinctly non-human. Carefully, Marcus cracked his eyes open, just enough to see through his lashes. The ceiling above him was a smooth, opalescent white that seemed to glow with its own internal light. No harsh fluorescence or LED panels, just a gentle radiance that was easy on the eyes. He could see the edge of some kind of medical equipment to his right, all flowing curves and organic shapes rather than the angular functional designs Earth's technology favored. Another sound reached him, a soft humming, not mechanical but musical, as if someone was humming a lullaby under their breath. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, with intervals and progressions that human music rarely used, but which somehow felt perfectly natural. Against all logic, it was comforting. Marcus decided to risk moving. He turned his head slightly to the left and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his skull. A soft exclamation came from nearby, and suddenly the humming stopped. He heard rapid movement, the triple-beat footsteps approaching quickly. "Please do not move rapidly," a voice said, and this time the words were in perfect, unaccented English. "Your cranial injury requires careful monitoring." Marcus opened his eyes fully and looked up into a face that was definitely not human, yet somehow beautiful in its alienness. Large, dark eyes dominated features that were elegant and angular, with skin that held a pale blue undertone like moonlight on snow. What he had taken for hair was actually a cascade of delicate, feathery structures that shifted color from silver to pale gold as they caught the light. She, and despite the alien features, Marcus was somehow certain the being was female, had 4 arms, each ending in long, graceful fingers that moved with precise, practiced motions as she checked the displays of nearby medical equipment. "You are experiencing disorientation," she continued, noting his stare with what might have been amusement. "This is normal for your species after neural trauma. I am Physician Assistant Valora Nistai of the Cooperative Medical Collective. You are currently in the emergency treatment facility aboard Research Station Harmony 12. Marcus tried to speak but managed only a croak. Immediately, one of Valora's 4 hands reached for a container, while another adjusted his bed to a more upright position. The 3rd hand supported his head with surprising gentleness, and the 4th brought a straw to his lips. Small sips, she advised. Your digestive system has been inactive for 74 hours. The liquid was cool and had a faintly sweet taste that reminded him of honey and starlight. It soothed his throat and cleared his head remarkably quickly. As the fog of confusion lifted, he became more aware of his surroundings and his situation. "My ship," he managed to say. "My crew?" Valora's feathery crest flattened slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed regret. "You were the only survivor we could retrieve. I'm sorry. The debris field was extensive, and Kitharan patrol ships remained in the area for some time after the engagement." The weight of loss settled on Marcus like a physical thing. Rodriguez had been a good captain, fair and experienced. Williams, the ship's engineer, had photos of his kids taped to every surface in the engine room. Patterson, barely out of the academy, had been excited about her first deep space assignment. Gone, all of them, because they'd happened to be in the wrong place when tensions between the Cooperative and the Kitharan Empire finally boiled over into open conflict. "Why did you save me?" Marcus asked, not with bitterness, but with genuine curiosity. "Our species aren't exactly allies." Valora's crest rippled in what he was beginning to recognize as surprise. "You are an injured being requiring medical assistance. No other justification is necessary. The Cooperative Medical Collective treats all sentient life forms regardless of political affiliation." It was such a simple statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact conviction, that Marcus found himself staring. In all his years of military service and exploration, he'd grown accustomed to thinking in terms of us versus them, allies and enemies, the complex calculations of interstellar politics. The idea that someone would risk their own safety to rescue a member of a potentially hostile species simply because it was the right thing to do was both foreign and deeply moving. "Besides," Valora added, and her crest shifted to what might have been humor, "your species has proven to be fascinating from a medical perspective. Your healing responses are quite remarkable." Over the next several hours, Marcus learned more about his situation. Research Station Harmony 12 was a neutral medical facility operated by the Cooperative, positioned in a disputed system specifically to provide emergency care for travelers of all species. The station's staff included representatives from dozens of different civilizations, all bound by the Compact of Healing, an ancient agreement that medical facilities would remain neutral in all conflicts. Valora, he discovered, was not technically a doctor by human standards, but filled a similar role in cooperative society. Her species, the Altrani, were natural empaths with an instinctive understanding of biological systems. They made excellent medical practitioners, though their emotional sensitivity meant they often found it difficult to work with species that were naturally aggressive or violent. "Your species presents unique challenges," Valora admitted as she ran a scanner over his healing ribs. "Humans experience physical pain and emotional distress in ways that are intense compared to most species. When I first encountered you, the psychic resonance was overwhelming." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Psychic resonance?" "Altrani can sense the emotional and physical state of other beings," she explained. "It helps us provide better medical care. But humans broadcast their feelings very strongly. When I first tried to examine you, I nearly collapsed from the feedback." "Sorry about that," Marcus said, feeling oddly embarrassed. Valora's crest shimmered with what he was learning to recognize as laughter. "Do not apologize. It is not a weakness. Your species feels things deeply, experiences life with an intensity that is actually quite remarkable. Most species tend toward emotional equilibrium. They feel pleasure and pain, but within narrow ranges. Humans exist at the extremes. You love passionately, grieve deeply, and hope beyond all logic. It makes you difficult to treat medically, but also fascinating." As the days passed, Marcus found himself looking forward to Valora's visits with an eagerness that surprised him. Her alien appearance had quickly become familiar, and he discovered that her expressions were remarkably readable once he learned to watch the movements of her crest and the way her large eyes shifted color with her moods. She brought him books to read, translation devices that could render literature from dozens of civilizations into understandable text. He found Altrani poetry to be particularly beautiful, full of complex emotional layering that reminded him of classical music. In return, he told her stories about Earth, about human history and culture, and the strange, contradictory nature of his species. "Your people make little sense," Valora observed during one of their longer conversations. "You describe wars that lasted centuries over minor ideological differences, yet also speak of individuals who sacrificed everything to save complete strangers. You poison your own environment while simultaneously creating art of transcendent beauty. You are violent and peaceful, selfish and selfless, logical and completely irrational." Marcus laughed. "Welcome to humanity. We don't make sense to ourselves half the time." "Yet you continue to survive and thrive," Valora noted. "Despite every logical prediction, despite conflicts that should have destroyed your species, despite challenges that would have broken most civilizations, humans persist. More than persist, you grow stronger. It is puzzling." "Maybe that's our secret," Marcus suggested. "We don't know when to quit." It was during his second week in the medical facility that Marcus first held Valora's hand. She had been checking his neural responses, using a scanner that required her to place her fingers against his temples. The device malfunctioned, sending a feedback pulse through both of them that left them connected for a moment in a way that transcended normal sensory experience. Marcus felt what Valora felt, the careful professional concern overlaying genuine fondness that had grown during their daily interactions. But more than that, he sensed something deeper: loneliness. For all her competence and the respect of her colleagues, Valora was isolated by her very nature. Her empathic abilities made casual contact with most species difficult and meaningful relationships nearly impossible. In that moment of connection, Marcus understood that Valora had never experienced anything like what humans called love. Her species formed partnerships based on compatibility and mutual benefit, but the passionate, irrational, all-consuming emotion that humans knew was completely foreign to them. Without thinking, Marcus reached out and took her hand. Not the professional contact of medical examination, but the simple human gesture of comfort and connection. Valora's eyes widened with surprise, and her crest shifted through a rapid cascade of colors he'd never seen before. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "I'm holding your hand," Marcus said simply. "It's something humans do when we care about someone." Valora stared down at their joined hands, and Marcus could see her struggling to process the flood of emotions the contact was generating. For the first time since meeting her, he saw tears in her large, dark eyes. "I do not understand," she said, but she didn't pull away. "You don't have to understand it," Marcus replied. "Just feel it." They stayed that way for a long moment, sharing something that had no name in either of their languages, but which both recognized as profoundly important. When Valora finally pulled away, her expression was one of wonder and confusion and something that might have been fear. This should not be possible," she said, backing toward the door. "Altrani do not form such connections with other species. We cannot. Our neural structures are incompatible." She fled before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone with the growing realization that he had just shared something extraordinary with a being from another world, something that might change both their lives in ways neither of them fully understood. Outside his room, he could hear the normal sounds of the medical facility continuing their routine patterns. Patients being treated, staff going about their duties, the steady hum of life support systems maintaining an environment where a dozen different species could coexist. But for Marcus, everything had changed in the space of a simple human gesture. He had held the hand of someone who had never experienced such contact, had shared a moment of pure connection across the vast gulf of evolution and culture that separated their species. And somehow, impossibly, it had worked. As he settled back against his pillows to wait for Valora's return, Marcus found himself humming softly. It was the melody she had been humming when he first woke up, the alien lullaby that had comforted him in his confusion and fear. He didn't know the words, might never know them, but the music had become part of him. Just as he was beginning to realize, Valora had become part of him as well. For 3 days, Valora avoided Marcus's room. Other medical staff attended to his needs, a rotation of efficient professionals from various species who checked his vitals, administered medications, and maintained the careful detachment that their training demanded. None of them spoke to him beyond the basic requirements of their duties, and none of them hummed the haunting melodies that had made his recovery bearable. Marcus found himself watching the door with an anticipation that bordered on desperation. He had experienced loss before, the deaths of comrades, the end of relationships, the inevitable separations that came with a life spent traveling between stars. But this felt different. The absence of someone he had known for less than 3 weeks shouldn't have affected him so deeply, yet he found himself replaying their conversations, analyzing every moment of their brief connection, wondering if he had somehow crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. On the 4th day, as Marcus was working through the physical therapy exercises designed to restore function to his injured leg, the door chimed softly. He looked up expecting to see one of the rotating staff members, but instead found Valora standing in the doorway. Her usually graceful posture seemed uncertain, and her crest was held in a pattern he had never seen before, tight against her skull, almost defensive. "Your neural activity patterns have been irregular," she said without preamble, consulting a datapad with all 4 hands to avoid meeting his eyes. "Dr. Thessarian was concerned that there might be residual trauma from your cranial injury." Marcus set down the resistance band he had been using and studied her face. "My neural patterns are fine, Valora. We both know why you're really here." Her crest rippled with what he had learned to recognize as anxiety. "I do not know what you mean." "You're afraid," Marcus said gently. "Not of me, but of what happened between us, of what it means." Valora's large eyes finally met his, and Marcus could see the turmoil she was experiencing. "It should not be possible," she repeated, echoing her words from 3 days earlier. "Altrani neural structures are not compatible with deep empathic bonding across species barriers. We have studied this extensively. The physiological differences are too great." Marcus patted the edge of his bed, an invitation. After a long moment, Valora approached and perched on the very edge, maintaining careful distance between them. "Maybe the problem isn't with your neural structures," Marcus suggested. "Maybe it's with your understanding of what's possible." "I have consulted the literature," Valora said, her voice carrying the precise tone of someone reciting from memory. "Cross-species emotional bonding occurs in less than 0.3% of documented interactions, and never with the intensity of what I experienced. The physiological stress alone should have been sufficient to trigger protective neural shutdown." Marcus leaned back against his pillows, studying the alien woman who had become so important to him in such a short time. "Can I tell you something about humans, Valora? Something that might explain why your literature doesn't account for us?" She nodded, though her crest remained tight with apprehension. "We don't believe in impossible," Marcus said. "Oh, we understand the concept intellectually. We know there are physical laws and biological limitations and mathematical certainties. But emotionally, psychologically, we just don't accept it. When someone tells a human something can't be done, our immediate reaction is to figure out how to do it anyway." Valora's crest loosened slightly, and Marcus could see her genuine curiosity overcoming her fear. That seems inefficient. Surely acceptance of limitations allows for better resource allocation? Maybe, Marcus conceded, but it also allows for miracles. Every major breakthrough in human history happened because someone refused to accept what was supposed to be impossible. We walked on the moon because we decided that being stuck on one planet was unacceptable. We cured diseases that had killed millions because we decided that death wasn't the inevitable end of illness. We built machines that could think because we decided that intelligence didn't have to be limited to biological systems. And you believe this applies to emotional connections as well? Valora asked. Marcus extended his hand, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. I believe that when humans want something badly enough, we find a way to make it work, even if it shouldn't be possible. Valora stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. When she finally placed her fingers against his palm, Marcus felt the same electric connection they had shared before, but stronger now, more focused. Through the link, he could sense her amazement at the depth of emotion humans were capable of experiencing. Your species feels everything so intensely, she whispered, wonder coloring her voice. Love, grief, hope, despair, all of it at levels that would incapacitate most beings. How do you function with such overwhelming sensory input? We don't just function, Marcus said, gently closing his fingers around hers. We thrive because of it. Those intense emotions you're sensing, they're not a design flaw. They're what make us human. They drive us to achieve things that rational, emotionally balanced species would never attempt. Through their connection, Marcus shared memories with Valora, not just his own, but the collective human experience as he understood it. He showed her parents working multiple jobs to provide better lives for their children, soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades, scientists dedicating their lives to problems that might not be solved for generations. He shared the story of the Voyager probes, launched into the void with messages for civilizations that might not exist, carried by nothing more than hope and stubborn human optimism. Valora's empathic abilities allowed her to experience these emotions as if they were her own, and Marcus felt her shock at the sheer intensity of human feeling. But gradually, shock gave way to something else, a kind of awe at the realization that such powerful emotions could be channeled into something positive. We are taught that emotional extremes are dangerous, Valora said, her voice barely audible. That they lead to instability and poor decision-making, but your species uses them as fuel. Not always successfully, Marcus admitted. We've done terrible things because of those same emotions. Wars, genocides, environmental destruction, all driven by fear or hatred or greed. But we've also done incredible things. We've sacrificed everything for love, fought impossible odds for justice, and reached for stars because we couldn't bear the thought of staying earthbound. Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm that began wailing throughout the station. Emergency lighting bathed the medical facility in harsh red, and Marcus could hear the rapid movement of staff responding to whatever crisis had emerged. Valora immediately pulled her hand away and was on her feet, her medical training overriding their personal moment. Remain here, she instructed, moving toward the door. Station emergencies require all medical personnel to report immediately. But Marcus was already struggling out of bed, his injured leg protesting but supporting his weight. What kind of emergency? Valora paused at the door, conflict evident in her expression. Mass casualty incident. A Catheran transport was attacked by raiders in the outer system. They managed to reach our defensive perimeter, but barely. We are expecting multiple critical injuries. Catherans, Marcus said, the word heavy with meaning. The same species that destroyed my ship. The compact of healing applies to all beings, Valora reminded him firmly. Political conflicts are irrelevant in this facility. Marcus nodded, understanding her position, but feeling the familiar surge of complex emotions that came with human moral reasoning. The Catharans were his enemies, the ones responsible for the deaths of his crewmates. But they were also injured beings in need of help, and his human conscience wouldn't allow him to take satisfaction in their suffering. "I want to help," he said. Valora's crest flattened in what he now recognized as exasperation. "You are a patient. You have no medical training. Your presence would be highly irregular." "Maybe," Marcus said, moving carefully toward the door. "But I have something your other medical staff don't have." "Which is?" Marcus met her eyes, and she saw in them the same stubborn determination that had driven humans to achieve the impossible throughout their history. "I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it means to be alone and afraid and dependent on the kindness of strangers who have no reason to help you." Over the next several hours, Research Station Harmony 12 was transformed into a desperate battleground against death and suffering. The Catharan transport had carried nearly 300 passengers, civilians fleeing the growing conflict in their home system. The raider attack had left their ship barely functional, and many of the passengers had sustained injuries that pushed the limits of even the station's advanced medical technology. Marcus found himself pressed into service despite his own injuries and lack of formal training. His human intuition for emotional needs proved invaluable in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. While the medical staff focused on the technical aspects of treatment, Marcus moved through the emergency ward, providing something equally important: comfort. He held the hand of a young Catharan female whose primary arms had been severed in the attack, sharing his strength as the surgical team worked to reattach them. He sat with an elderly Catharan male who had lost his entire family in the attack, offering the silent presence that grief demanded. He carried messages between separated family members, translated complex medical procedures into terms that panicked civilians could understand, and provided the kind of emotional support that most species' medical training simply didn't address. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Thessarian, the station's chief medical officer, observed to Valora during a brief break between surgeries. "Patient Chen has no formal medical education, yet his contribution to treatment outcomes has been remarkable. Stress hormones in patients he attends are consistently lower, pain medication requirements are reduced, and recovery times appear to be improving." Valora watched Marcus through the observation window as he knelt beside an injured Catharan child, showing the youngster simple card tricks to distract from the pain of treatment. "Humans have an unusual capacity for empathy," she said. "They can connect with other beings on an emotional level that transcends species barriers." "But the Catharans are the ones who destroyed his ship," Dr. Thessarian pointed out. "According to his records, they killed his entire crew." "How can he provide comfort to members of the same species that caused him such loss?" Valora considered the question, drawing on her growing understanding of human psychology. "Because that is what humans do," she said finally. "They separate the individual from the group, the person from the politics. They see suffering as suffering regardless of its source." As the emergency continued, Marcus found himself working alongside Valora more closely than ever before. His intuitive understanding of emotional needs complemented her medical expertise in ways that benefited every patient they encountered. When he held a patient's hand during a particularly painful procedure, Valora could monitor the resulting physiological changes and adjust treatment accordingly. When she identified emotional distress that was impeding healing, Marcus could provide the specific type of support that would address it. They developed a working rhythm that felt natural despite their different species and training. Marcus would establish emotional contact with a patient using his human empathy to understand their needs, while Valora would read the resulting changes in their biological systems and modify treatment protocols. It was a partnership that neither had expected, but which proved remarkably effective. "You are changing how we practice medicine," Valora told him during a brief rest period. They were sitting in a quiet corner of the ward, sharing a meal of protein synthesizers and watching the controlled chaos of emergency medical care continue around them. "I'm just doing what feels right," Marcus replied. "Humans aren't really good at anything else." "That is not true," Valora said, and her crest was held in the pattern he had learned indicated deep thought. "What you are doing requires considerable skill. You assess each patient's emotional state within moments of contact, determine what type of support they need, and provide it without causing additional stress. Most medical training programs spend years teaching such skills." Marcus considered this, recognizing truth in her observation even though he had never thought of his actions in those terms. "Maybe it's not about training," he said. "Maybe it's about motivation. When you really care about someone's suffering, you find ways to help that you didn't know you were capable of." As if summoned by his words, an alarm sounded from one of the nearby treatment rooms. Through the window, they could see a surgical team working frantically around a Kitharan patient whose vital signs were rapidly deteriorating. The patient appeared to be a young adult, and despite the medical team's best efforts, their life signs continued to decline. "Neural shock," Valora said, reading the displays through the window. "The patient's nervous system is shutting down from trauma. Unless we can stabilize the neural feedback loops within the next few minutes." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus was already on his feet, moving toward the treatment room despite the protests of medical staff who tried to block his way. He pushed through the crowd of professionals surrounding the bed and took the patient's hand in both of his own. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The chaotic neural patterns displayed on the monitoring equipment began to stabilize as Marcus established emotional contact with the dying Kitharan. Through their connection, he shared his own strength and will to live, his absolutely human refusal to accept that death was inevitable. "Impossible," Dr. Thessarian breathed, watching the patient's vital signs strengthen. "Cross-species neural stabilization has never been documented. The physiological differences should make such intervention impossible." Valora was monitoring both Marcus and the patient, and what she saw challenged everything she had learned about the limitations of empathic connection. "Human neural patterns are unlike anything in the medical literature," she reported. "Patient Chen is somehow creating a feedback loop that is reinforcing the patient's own neural activity." For 20 minutes, Marcus maintained the connection, pouring his own life force into the failing Kitharan. When the patient's vital signs finally stabilized and the immediate crisis passed, Marcus collapsed from exhaustion. But he was smiling as Valora caught him, because another being was alive who might otherwise have died. "How?" Valora whispered as she helped him to a nearby chair. "How is such a thing possible?" Marcus looked up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears of relief and triumph. "Because humans don't know when to quit," he said simply. "And sometimes that's exactly what the universe needs." Around them, the emergency ward continued its vital work, but something fundamental had changed. The staff had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of what was possible in medicine, in empathy, and in the connections that could exist between different forms of life. And at the center of it all was a human who had held hands with death itself and refused to let go. 6 weeks after the Kitharan rescue operation, Research Station Harmony 12 had been transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The changes were evident in the daily routines of medical staff, who now incorporated emotional assessment protocols that had never existed before. Treatment rooms were redesigned to allow for the kind of sustained physical comfort that Marcus had demonstrated could be medically beneficial. Most remarkably, the station's success rates for treating traumatic injuries had improved by 37%. A statistical anomaly that was drawing attention from medical facilities throughout the galaxy. Marcus stood in the observation deck of the station's central hub, watching ships arrive and depart through the massive transparent aluminum windows that offered a view of the surrounding star field. His leg had healed completely, and according to every medical scan, he was fit to return to active duty. Earth Command had sent 3 separate messages requesting his immediate return for debriefing, and a transport ship was standing by to take him home whenever he was ready. He wasn't ready. "The Galactic Medical Council has requested permission to send an observation team," Valora said, joining him at the window. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved into something that neither of them had words for, but which felt as natural as breathing. "They want to study the new treatment protocols we have developed." Marcus smiled at her careful phrasing. "The protocols I accidentally created by not knowing any better, you mean?" "The protocols you created by being human," Valora corrected gently. "Dr. Thessarian has written a paper about the incident. He calls it Therapeutic Applications of Extreme Empathic Response. It is already being cited in medical journals across known space." "And what do you call it?" Marcus asked, turning to face her. Valora's crest shifted through a complex pattern of colors that he had learned indicated deep emotion. "I call it the day I learned that impossible is just a word that means no one has figured out how yet." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Thessarian himself, who approached with the distinctive gait of someone carrying important news. The Zillan chief medical officer had become one of Marcus's strongest advocates over the past weeks, despite initially viewing the humans' involvement in medical procedures with considerable skepticism. "Marcus, I need to speak with you," Dr. Thessarian said, his translator rendering his complex vocalizations into standard English. "I have received a most unusual communication from the Cooperative Medical Collective's governing board." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" "They want to offer you a position," Dr. Thessarian said without preamble. "Not as a medical practitioner, obviously, since you lack the formal training, but as what they are calling an empathic liaison specialist, the first of its kind in any medical organization." The offer was unprecedented. No human had ever been offered a formal position within the cooperative's medical system, and the creation of an entirely new job classification suggested that Marcus's impact had reached the highest levels of galactic medical administration. "They want me to travel to other medical facilities," Marcus said slowly, understanding the implications. "To teach other medical staff how to incorporate emotional support into their treatment protocols." "More than that," Dr. Thessarian explained. "They want you to help establish a new branch of medical practice, emotional healing to complement physical treatment. The preliminary studies suggest that what you accomplished here could be replicated on a much larger scale." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. It represented everything he had never known he wanted: a chance to make a difference that extended beyond military service to help beings throughout the galaxy in ways that went beyond conflict and politics. It was also a chance to remain near Valora, to explore their impossible connection without the constraints of his eventual departure, but it was also a complete departure from everything he had planned for his life. "There is more," Dr. Thessarian continued. "The Catharan Empire has formally requested that you be assigned to their primary medical facility on Cathara Prime. The families of the patients you helped during the emergency have petitioned their government directly. They believe your presence could help heal the psychological trauma that their people have suffered from years of conflict." "The Kitharans want me?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "The same Kitharans who destroyed my ship?" "The same Catharans whose children you comforted while they recovered from traumatic injuries," Valora said softly. "Who you held while they grieved for lost family members. Who you treated as individuals rather than enemies." Marcus understood the irony. His greatest enemies had become some of his most vocal advocates, simply because he had treated them with the basic human decency that his species took for granted. It was such a fundamentally human response to see the person behind the politics, the individual beyond the ideology, that other species had needed weeks of analysis to understand its medical benefits. "What do you think I should do?" Marcus asked Valora. She was quiet for a long time, her crest cycling through patterns that spoke of deep consideration. "I think," she said finally, "that you should do what humans always do. You should choose the path that seems impossible and find a way to make it work." "And you?" Marcus asked. "What happens to you in this impossible scenario?" Valora's large eyes met his, and Marcus could see in them a reflection of his own hopes and fears. "I have also received an offer," she said quietly. "The medical collective wants to assign me as your professional partner, to study the physiological effects of your empathic interventions and help develop standardized protocols for other medical facilities." It was, Marcus realized, their own version of happily ever after. Not the simple resolution of human fairy tales, but the complex, challenging future that their relationship deserved. They would travel together throughout the galaxy, bringing a new form of healing to worlds that had never experienced the particular brand of stubborn compassion that humans specialized in. "There is one condition to the offer," Dr. Thessarian added, with what Marcus had learned to recognize as Zillan amusement. "You must first complete formal certification in xenopsychology and empathic therapy. The collective is willing to make exceptions for unprecedented circumstances, but they still have standards." Marcus laughed, imaging himself sitting through lectures on subjects he had learned through pure instinct and necessity. But if formal education was the price for legitimizing what he wanted to do anyway, it seemed like a reasonable trade. "How long would the training take?" he asked. 18 months at the Cooperative's primary education facility, Dr. Thessarian replied. Valora would be assisting with the curriculum development, since many of the protocols being taught would be based on your collaborative work here. It was perfect in the way that human dreams rarely were, a future that addressed not just Marcus's desires, but the practical realities of working within galactic civilization. He would get the education he needed. Valora would have the research opportunities she deserved. And together they would pioneer a new form of medicine that could help beings throughout known space. "I'll need to send word to Earth Command," Marcus said. "Let them know I'm requesting reassignment to civilian service." "Already done," Dr. Thessarian admitted. "I took the liberty of contacting your superiors when the offer was first made. They have agreed to release you from military service with full honors. Apparently, the strategic value of having a human embedded in the cooperative medical system outweighs their desire to have you continue in active duty." Marcus wasn't surprised. Earth's military leadership had always been practical about such things, and the diplomatic benefits of his new position would be considerable. A human working successfully within one of the galaxy's most respected neutral organizations would open doors that decades of traditional diplomacy had failed to open. "There is one more thing," Valora said, producing a small device that Marcus didn't recognize. "A communication from one of your former patients." The device projected a holographic image of the young Kitharan that Marcus had saved during the neural shock crisis. The alien's appearance had improved dramatically. Where before there had been pain and desperation, now there was health and vitality. "Human Marcus," the recording began, speaking in carefully pronounced English. "I am Kithvar Meltanos. You saved my life when our ship was attacked. My family has asked me to give you this message." The image flickered and was replaced by what was clearly a family group, multiple Kitharans of various ages standing together in what appeared to be a garden setting. They spoke in unison, their voices creating a complex harmony that the translator rendered into English. "We were taught to fear your species," they said. "We were told that humans were violent and unpredictable, that they could not be trusted in times of crisis. But you showed us something different. You showed us that beings can choose compassion over conflict, healing over hatred. Our son lives because you refuse to see him as an enemy. We want you to know that there are now Kitharans who understand what humans truly are, not warriors, but healers. Thank you for giving us back our child." The message ended, leaving Marcus staring at the space where the hologram had been. It was exactly the kind of response that made every difficult choice worthwhile. The knowledge that his actions had changed not just individual lives, but entire perspectives on what was possible between species. "They are not the only ones," Valora said softly. "We have received similar messages from patients representing 17 different species. Word of what happened here is spreading throughout the galaxy." Marcus nodded, understanding the broader implications. What had started as a simple act of human compassion was becoming something larger, a demonstration that the universe's most intractable problems might have solutions that no one had considered before. That emotional healing could be just as important as physical repair. That the barriers between species might be more permeable than anyone had imagined. "When do we start?" he asked. "The transport to the education facility leaves tomorrow," Dr. Thessarian replied. "Though I suspect you both have some personal matters to discuss before then." The Zillan doctor departed with what Marcus had learned to recognize as tactful discretion, leaving him alone with Valora in the observation deck. Outside the windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, each one representing worlds where the kind of healing they had discovered together might someday make a difference. "Are you certain about this?" Valora asked. "You would be giving up your military career, your chance to return to Earth, your connection to your own people." Marcus took her hand, all four of them. Since Altrani customs suggested that holding hands was a commitment that involved one's entire being. "I'm not giving up anything important," he said. "I'm trading one kind of service for another. Instead of fighting wars, I'll be healing their aftermath. Instead of serving one species, I'll be helping all of them." "And instead of being alone," Valora added, her crest shifting to the pattern that meant joy, "you will be with someone who understands that impossible is just another word for unprecedented." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching ships navigate the space around the station. Each vessel carried beings from different worlds, different cultures, different evolutionary paths that had all somehow led to this moment when they could coexist peacefully in the vast emptiness between stars. It was, Marcus reflected, exactly the kind of impossible thing that humans specialized in making possible. Not through force or technology or political maneuvering, but through the simple recognition that every being, regardless of species or origin, shared the same fundamental needs for comfort, understanding, and hope. "Valora," Marcus said quietly, "when I first woke up here, you were humming. Do you remember?" "Yes," she replied. "It is a traditional Altrani healing song. We use it to calm patients during recovery." "Would you teach it to me?" Marcus asked. "All of it, not just the melody. I want to learn the words." Valora's crest shifted to the pattern that meant profound happiness. "It will take time," she warned. "Altrani vocal structures are quite complex." "I have time," Marcus said, squeezing her hands gently. "We have time." And as Valora began to hum the ancient melody that had comforted him during his darkest hours, Marcus understood that he had found something more valuable than his old life, more meaningful than his military service, more important than any mission he had ever undertaken. He had found a way to heal the galaxy, one impossible connection at a time. The stars outside continued their eternal dance, but now Marcus and Valora danced with them. Two beings from different worlds who had discovered that the universe was far more beautiful when experienced together. Their story was just beginning, but already it was changing how beings throughout known space understood the possibilities that existed when someone was willing to reach across the void and simply hold another's hand. In medical facilities across the galaxy, staff were learning that healing involved more than repairing tissue and correcting chemical imbalances. On distant worlds, beings who had never heard of humans were beginning to understand that there were species in the universe who specialized in the impossible art of caring about strangers. And in the quiet moments between crises, when the universe paused to catch its breath, there was the sound of gentle humming, an alien lullaby being shared between worlds, carried by the voice of a human who had learned that sometimes the most powerful medicine was the simple act of refusing to let go.